10-yard line.
You gotta be kidding me.
It is the New Orleans Saints football. There is a God after all.
Join us as we celebrate 50 years of cheers, tears, and celebrations we'll never forget on our home turf.
Look out, right through. A pick block by Steve Gleason. It is scooped and scored by Curtis DeLoach. Touchdown, New Orleans.
Hear from the players that made those unforgettable moments and those who were there to tell the story.
Snap, placement, kick by Hartley, and it is good! It's good! It's good! Pigs have flown. Hell is frozen over. The Saints are on their way to the Super Bowl.
Taking us on this half-century journey are your hosts, John DeShazier and Gus Kattengell.
The Saints win!
Welcome to Home Sweet Home, a New Orleans Saints podcast presented by Caesars New Orleans. 10 of the greatest games in the Caesars Superdome. That is what we're celebrating as the Saints celebrate 50 years of the Superdome being called home there on Porters. John DeShazier, NewOrleansSaints.com. Gus Kattengell with you here as well. Number one on my list at the very least. John, is it number one in your list of the top 10?
It has to be.
Saints Dome reopening. So much goes into this. Where do you even begin?
Well, I think it's, from my vantage point and what I remember is it's the most emotional that I've ever seen a sporting event, and not just for the local fans and media, for national. I mean, generally, you're supposed to be an unbiased observer as a journalist. And I was working for the Times-Picayune then. And look, no one in the press box was unbiased. And I don't care where you came from, New York, New Orleans, Los Angeles, wherever, you were not unbiased. There were folks in there shedding tears, myself among them, when you do the national anthem and you grasp the magnitude of it, because look, we were talking about something that for a while you had, I don't know if you had doubts that it would happen. You wondered when it would happen, and you get all the undercurrents of the things going on the back, the stories going on the back pages where hey, will the Saints return to New Orleans? Hey, when is the Superdome going to be ready? Hey, when is New Orleans as a city going to be functional? And so from that standpoint, when you're able to get the Superdome together, play a football game, understand that there was certainly a lot of peripheral things going on, and not everything was right with the city. Mm-hmm. But when that Superdome light came on, it signaled to the world New Orleans is back in business. New Orleans is on. It might not be sprinting, but New Orleans is on its feet, and the recovery is in full effect.
As I approach 50 here in January, I've lived here my entire life. That building has always been in the skyline for me, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was born in 76. I don't know a New Orleans skyline without that building in it. That's how I think of, and what I think of, what it was like that day for me. Growing up, driving past it, in the days of going to Brother Martin from the West Bank, and literally have to pass the building to get on I-10 East there. And then eventually working there and working across the bridge. Forget the street, the bridge. I worked at WWL at the time. Our studio buildings and our offices looked out right at the dome. And that very same bridge where, months earlier, remember seeing what that looked like for Katrina. And then that day, I remember a full day's coverage, obviously, of being about that and being on that little bridge when they dropped the banner, and there's Deuce, and then the crowd's going nuts, and the Goo Goo Dolls are playing live on MTV, and just going in there, and it still kind of really hadn't hit you. And then, John, the game starts, and look, so much happened, right? I mean, it's a new coach, a guy that, let's be honest, we all thought was going to bring us to the promised land in the name of Reggie Bush. I still remember draft day. chanting Reggie. Drew Brees, that's nice. Hopefully he knows how to throw a pass. No one was excited about that. You didn't think that a Hall of Famer started. And they go on the road and things happen that you hadn't seen before. They win 2 road games in comeback fashion over at Green Bay, 19-14, 34-27. So there was excitement. There was like, hey, this team's not bad, but you just couldn't wait to get in that dome. And then the game starts.
Here's the thing. Well, one, I was an emotional wreck by the time they kicked off, and I think everyone else was. But you think about New Orleans, and there are 2 things. If you played on Family Feud, and they said, okay, what comes to mind when you think of New Orleans, and your top 5 answers or whatever. I think the top 2 would be, French Quarter and the Superdome. Because when you think about New Orleans, at some point quickly, you're going to say the Caesars Superdome. Yeah, that's New Orleans. That's what New Orleans is. It's the French Quarter, or Bourbon Street, French Quarter, and the Superdome. That facility has been there, and to have that facility back up and going, again, you're passing by, and at the time, before it was repaired, you see, the roof damage, and you hear about the interior damage that's caused because, the parts of the roof had sheared off. And you're like, an old friend is wounded. That's the feeling that you had. And people saying, well, why are they putting resources into putting the Superdome back? Because the Superdome is iconic. The Superdome is New Orleans, and it's the bat signal to the world that New Orleans is ready. New Orleans is back in. New Orleans is recovering, and so. You can't ask for more than that. And in fact, I know the Superdome, has lighting, that signifies different things. They should put the bat signal on there at some point in time, because it does kind of make everybody take notice. When you're driving past that place, you got to take notice of it, because as you mentioned, it is a part of the skyline. It is New Orleans.
When you think of that game going into it, look, it's your rival in Atlanta, and you know all about that rivalry, obviously, going into it here as well. And look, I don't know what my expectations were. Do you remember what your expectations were going to the game? Like, were you thinking, man, if they can just win, if they can just find a way? I mean, like, what was your expectations?
The game was the last thing on my mind.
Really?
Because there was so much going around it and so much emotion going around it that I really wasn't thinking about what was going to happen on the field. I was more in tune with, not the hoopla around the game. Well, yeah, I guess it was the hoopla around the game, because, again, you're talking about not having been able to play in that place for such a long period of time. And so the game was like secondary. I understand now, the Saints won it, and that kind of put the cherry on top. But even if the Saints lose that game, it was just a symbol of being back in it and being back home that was so strong to me. So going into the game, now hindsight, you look back at it, and I think it was J.L. Mora, who was coach of the Falcons then, who once was secondary coach for the Saints, son of Jim E. Mora, Jim L. Mora. JL said, we didn't have a chance. And he was right. In hindsight, you think about it, and, I hate to say the NFL set him up, but the NFL set him up by making them the first game in the Superdome that after the reopening, because I don't care who was coming in, defending Super Bowl champs, the Falcons, it didn't matter who was coming in. They were not going to win that game that night against the Saints when the Superdome reopened.
No doubt. And then the play of plays took place.
Michael Kanan, who has made a headline for missing 6 of his 8 field goal attempts this year, is now back to just punting and kicking off. The former Saint Morton Anderson is here for most field goals. Look out! Right through! A kick block by Steve Gleason. It is scooped and scored by Curtis DeLoach. Touchdown, New Orleans!
Mike Tirico, years later and still to this day, talks about the understanding of letting that moment breathe.
Yeah.
That's what I remember. I couldn't believe it. I'm trying not to get choked up. I did. I mean, there was from U2's opening to that was so much more than just that moment. I don't know why it's so weird. It could have been an interception. It could have been, I don't know what it was and why. It was almost like everyone was just waiting to just exhale as loudly as possible. We're all tired from cleaning the fridges to your house to the tarps, the insurance. Like you just wanted to let it out. It's the only thing like I can just sort of think about from that moment. I had the fortune of being the Saints Solid reporter for 2 seasons. And I've had it oftentimes when Jim Henderson would toss it down to him. I had to turn up my headset a little bit because I couldn't hear. That was the loudest I've ever heard that place.
Yeah, you want an explosive play as a fan base. You don't know what it is. You expect it's going to be offense or defense.
You don't know, right.
It comes out to be special teams. But again, it's one of those things where after that play, the Falcons really could have just gone to the locker room, put on their stuff, and got on the bus and left because there was no way they were going to win that game. And again, you have, as you mentioned, so much pent-up emotion from everybody. There's no way you didn't have a feel for that game. Everybody had to feel some kind of way. And look, I would imagine, and I get it, if you're the Falcons, you probably can't admit this publicly, I'm sure. But if you're the Falcons, even the Falcons fans, you got to kind of feel some kind of, hey, you know what? They deserve that. That's okay. It's almost like, I don't mind losing that game to that team on that night because they needed that. And the Saints played that way. I mean, it was not the cleanest game in the world by any stretch of the imagination. But the Saints were a team that, they were 2-0, but they needed to be in that place. And again, I don't necessarily know if it takes away from everything that if you don't win the game. But now in hindsight, it's like, you know what? Boy, that was, if you write that up in Hollywood and you give that script to somebody, and they're like, man, get out of here with that. That ain't believable. But it happens. It was a storybook kind of day, event, season. It was one of those things where you can't script it.
So to help us recap what that was like, maybe 2 different perspectives. Scott Fujita, of course, a huge part of the Saints, not only in 2006 and at that game, but of course being part of the Super Bowl winning team. And Mike Haas, voice of your New Orleans Saints, lead anchor, one of the lead anchors for Channel 4 at the time, obviously covering Katrina, the aftermath, and then now being the voice of the Saints. And thought it'd be interesting to kind of get that perspective there as well. So enjoy our conversations with Scott Fujita and Mike Haas. All right, JD, when I look at and think back at the Sean Payton era and the start of that process when the Saints turned the page to becoming a perennial winner and then eventually getting to the Super Bowl, I think of, obviously, with what we do, you get a media guide, right? At the beginning of the season, the beginning of the media guide, and even in college, you put the players that you think are going to be the faces of that team that year, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So, yeah, there's Marcus Colston, there's Drew Brees, there's Reggie, there's some guys on there. But Scott Fujita, to me, is one of those players that when he got here, the old chip on the shoulder, starting, I don't know if he's the G or the R or the I or the T in grit, but don't you feel he was just as a part of that group of collective that helped set a tone for that 06 season moving forward?
Well, he turned out to be one of the foundational pieces. I mean, when you're talking about the faces of that team, it was obviously Reggie Bush. We got Reggie. And then, Drew Brees, the free agent quarterback. And then the rest of the guys kind of came in, and they were somewhat unknown. I mean, Marcus Colston turned out, we didn't know Marcus Colston was going to be Marcus Colston, or he wouldn't have lasted to the 7th round. We didn't know, Jari Evans was going to be Jari Evans, or he wouldn't have been picked where he was picked. We didn't know Scott Fujita was going to be as important as Scott Fujita turned out to be to this franchise. Otherwise, he'd have come in the day Sean Payton came in. I mean, it was one of those situations. So, it's one of those things where everything kind of synced up and fit. And certainly Scott being one of the guys who came in and really set the foundation for this franchise. And when you talk about culture, you're talking about guys who understand, who have knowledge, who play the right way, who do the right things. That being one of those, Scott being one of those guys. And one of the things, of course, I always loved about him was he was a guy who, win, lose, draw, didn't matter what happened in this situation. Yeah. Scott would always man up and talk to the media, and he would tell you what was on his mind. I mean, it wasn't cookie cutter stuff. It wasn't, it wasn't just stuff that didn't make sense. He would always have some accountability, and that's one of the things you always appreciated about him, throughout his tenure with the Saints.
So we have Scott on to talk about, obviously, the Dome reopening, because that is the top game of the greatest games that we can think of on this list that we're doing as we recognize 50 years of the Saints being in the Superdome. But Scott, as we bring you in, and again, thanks for your time, that introduction, the game we're about to talk to, were you even remotely thinking about that when we showed up in Millsaps in Jackson, Mississippi in 2006?
First of all, Gus, JD, appreciate you guys having me. It's great to just reconnect. I mean, it's been 19 years. Is that where we are now since that Dome reopening? So, yeah, long time. But as you guys sort of reminisce, appreciate all the kind words. I think as we get further and further removed, some of the details become a little foggy, but I think the feeling remains the same, and that will stick forever. So, but to your question, Gus, I think at the time we really didn't know what we had. You mentioned it, sort of, Joe Vitt always described us as a bunch of mutts who came in, guys with grit, sort of castaways, and that sort of became our MO. And then when Sean takes us up to this place, Millsaps College, we're like, what in the flip and flap are we doing out here in the middle of nowhere? And I think that the Saints trainer will probably never admit this at the time, but there were about a run of 4 or 5 days where the temperature was becoming exceedingly hot. And, they didn't share that data with us. But trainer would go out there and he had his little, index card, and he'd be taking temperature, heat index, barometric pressure, whatever all the different data points are. And he'd write them on a little card, stick in his back pocket, go in and file it away in a locked file cabinet. And one day I went out and I said, I'm not going to mention names, but I said, all right, buddy, what's the number? And he would not tell me the number. So that evening, after everything was done, I went into the facility. I found that locked file cabinet, and I pulled out that card, and I saw what the number was, and it was 127. So those are the kinds of things, they call us the Junction Boys, that I think that group went through. And I think that first training camp with Sean, and we bust Sean's balls all the time about this now. I think we went 30 days straight, and you guys were there. I think it was 30 days straight before there was a day off. And the joke is, and on the 31st day, they rested. So these are the kind of things you can't get away with anymore. But when you talk about those foundational pieces, yeah, it was hard. And we didn't know what we had from a talent standpoint. We were just a bunch of probably reasonably above average guys, maybe. But with a chip on our shoulder, felt like that was something special or unique to play for. And sometimes you just roll up your sleeves and go to a place like Millsaps and kick the crap out of each other for 4 weeks, and you see what comes of that. So it was just these steady, slow building blocks. And Sean had such a good knack, even as a young head coach, who I think was still trying to find his way. Am I trying to be Parcells? Am I trying to be Andy Reid? So he was still trying to find his way, but he had such a unique sense for the pulse of the team and how to push all the right buttons. And those little pieces he had to do to build toughness, but then also to motivate or to break it down and build you back up. So it felt like kind of an experiment in some ways, character first, foundation, and then we go out, and once we win, then we'll get the talent. That's kind of how it felt. But yeah, it was a special time, but man, it was hard.
Yeah, I got to admit, Scott, I'm old, but I have not obviously seen every NFL training camp or every college training camp or high school. But that was the most challenging thing that I think I've ever seen from an NFL team since I've been covering the Saints. I've never seen a team withstand that kind of conditions repeatedly every day for 2 days, where guys are losing, 10, 15 pounds of water weight in the first practice, and they've got to get ready to go back out there the next practice. Do you guys look at these young guys and tell them, you don't know what the F you're talking about?
All the time. We say that all the time. But I got to be honest, the old school guys from back in the 70s and 80s, they told us the same thing. Yeah. So it's a generational thing. It's a tale as old as time. But I'll tell you what, these guys now have it good. I spent a couple days with the Saints at training camp last year down in Newport Beach. And I'm looking around at, Mickey and everybody else. There with Shanley and Roman came out and the whole crew. And it's like, oh, man, these kids. 71 degrees, sunny every day, ocean breeze, like a mile and a half away. It's like, wow.
Yeah, you got to tell them about how you walk to school, 3 miles
Yeah.
uphill in the snow both ways.
I
And
know.
it's
Now I'm the old get off my lawn guy. How about
Yeah,
that?
exactly. And Scott, one of the reasons I kind of wanted to start that way with JD and you as well is because when we think of this game, we think of obviously the emotion and everything it meant to the city and all that. But I almost feel like when you look back at those videos or those still shots of that moment that we're going to talk about, obviously the block punt, the winning of the game, and that moment and all that. It's almost like you guys were the same way as those fans too. You called it kind of an experiment and just kind of figuring out, hey, I've lived here my entire life. I turned 50, Scott, in January. We didn't know what we were doing after Katrina. It never happened before, So we were all dealing with being displaced or starting out here, or everybody working in a different spot. I mean, we all were in the same boat. And I think that's why I wanted to start there as we build to that game. We were all kind of figuring out the same time, almost kind of walking hand in hand, right? Oh, there's camp. Well, half the people maybe are trying to figure out and get information because maybe they're not in their house or they're in Houston, they're in Atlanta. So they're trying to figure out who is this team. And then there's game one. Okay, they win. Game two, they came win, they win on a comeback and things. We were all figuring it out at the same time leading up until that Monday Night Football game. You get what I'm getting at?
Yep, for sure. Yeah, and I agree. It does feel, like I said, experimental, like you're in this lab of sorts. And sometimes I think there is an upside to that when, one, you don't know what you got. And for sure, no one outside the building or the city, they definitely don't know what we got. So when there are zero expectations and all there is upside, then you really have nothing to lose in some respects, right? So it was just fascinating. I never forget my free agency visit coming in, and I had a series of different teams that were reaching out and trying to line up our visits in which priority order. And it was the Saints, Jaguars, Philly, and the Raiders. So it's like, oh, I got a chance to go back to Oakland and kind of be back home around the family. So it's okay how we prioritize these visits. So we chose to make the Saints our priority visit. So day one in free agency, my wife and I fly into New Orleans, meet Gary Gibbs at the airport, see Sean, the whole shebang. And you guys remember the city was not in great shape then. I mean, Church's Chicken was probably the only food place that was open. I remember that down Airline Drive. And the only bar was open was Lucy's Surfers Bar down on Chapatulas. That's my recollection, right? So our first night at the hotel, I go for a walk around town, like, what the hell is happening here? What is this place? What are we considering getting ourselves into? But we just had this instinct to make it the priority visit. One, Sean was there. We knew each other in Dallas. He had hired Joe Vitt to come in and be his assistant head coach. Joe drafted me in Kansas City. I knew Gary Gibbs well from Dallas. He would be my defensive coordinator. And it's like, okay, this just seems interesting, special, weird, scary. And I use this phrase all the time. It felt like a chance to be a part of something bigger than football. But my first night in New Orleans, the day after I went through my initial meetings with Sean and Mickey and everybody, I went out to walk around town, stumbled into Lucy's Retired Surfers Bar, strike up a conversation with the bartender. A couple folks are in town, and I was trying to keep a low profile, but they found out who I was and why I was in there. And I'll tell you, they bought me a drink and said, "Thank you for even coming here to take this visit." And that just spoke to me in a way. That night, my wife and I canceled the rest of our visits. We were going to Jacksonville next, then Philly and Oakland, and signed with the Saints the next day. So day two of I was there on day one of free agency, signed on day two, and that afternoon, when it was announced that Drew Brees had signed, I was okay. Now we got a chance. So it's just these things just sort of unravel in sometimes mysterious ways, and it really just felt like a fascinating time to be a part of this. And I think the connection with you guys in the media and the fans at Lucy's or at the airport when you get home from the games, all those things just felt unique and special and just made it feel so much bigger than just football. And, we talk about, this experimentation piece. We didn't even know if the building was going to be ready for us. Remember that?
Yeah.
They were still the paint was still literally drying on the outside of the dome when we were in there on a Wednesday or Thursday night practice, getting ready for a Monday night game against the Falcons. So there was so much that was just sort of left undone. And we were just cobbling shit together before game time. I mean, that's just how things played out.
Yeah, bigger than football is a great way to explain that and describe it, Scott. What was it like leading up to the actual game? You mentioned the Wednesday practice. What was it like, I guess, game day, going up to the dome? It was chaotic because I don't think anybody even knew what to do in terms of parking, but it was just chaotic throughout. And then on top of that, you guys got to you guys got to get your minds right to play a football game. But I mean, you don't even know how necessarily to get to the building, because I'm from here and I didn't know how to get to the Superdome, what were going to be the hoops that we had to jump through to even get inside.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when things are getting cobbled together at the last minute, some things fall through the cracks. Like, hey guys, here's where you're supposed to park. Here's how you get into the stadium. Here's what the security process is. I think when we came down for, I think it was an evening practice Sean wanted to schedule, whether it was, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Like I said, the details become foggy over time. But that was a team bus comes in, drops you off, they escort you in. But game day, we had no idea. So that's on Sean. That one fell through the cracks. But again, you get in the building, and like I said, the details become murky, but the feeling, like, you'll never forget that. It was one of these moments where you're just standing around looking at this place. And for those of us who were new, who didn't go through what you guys all experienced the previous year, or what the community had gone through and was still recovering from, I think that was the moment where it's like, okay, we kind of get it now, and just the impact of it. And I think it was one of those where, again, we still didn't know what we had. We went on the road for 2 games and sort of squeaked out and clawed and scratched for 2 wins, coming in against a Falcons team who seemed like they were rolling, running for 250 yards a game or whatever the stats were. But it was just one of those feelings. It's like the feeling is what it is. And there's just no way anybody, I don't care who it is, the 85 Bears, no one's going to come in and beat us on this game. And that sounds very cliche, but things become cliche because they're true. There was literally no way anybody was going to come into that building, given the emotion, even for a reasonably marginal, talented team at that time. It just wasn't going to happen. So it was just so fun, and they put together a great plan, a simple plan. Defense, we had a plan to shut down Michael Vick, and what they had was very simple, but they had talent. So it's okay. Let's sort of match them with a good plan, and find ways to just sort of contain them. So it was just, again, one of those things that just sort of worked out in mysterious ways. And it was just these steady building blocks. It's just keep building over the course of 3, 4, 5 years.
Scott, I just dislocated my right shoulder from patting myself on the back because I've been telling everybody that nobody was going to beat the Saints that night. No way there was going to be any NFL team in history that was going to beat the Saints that night. But I got to ask you, one of the biggest plays in Saints franchise history, obviously, the block punt, almost didn't happen because of you. Because of you. Now, do you ever tell Steve, hey, man, you owe me? Because, 3rd down, you sack Michael Vick, 6-yard sack, cause a fumble, and the fumble somehow evades and goes out of bounds. And that's why the Falcons had to line up to punt. First series of the game, that's why they had to line up to punt. Then Steve Gleason does this thing, and Curtis Deloach does the recovery. But all because Scott Fujita didn't get on top of that football.
All right. I'm going to go back. Some revisionist history here. Right? So I'm going to walk you through the way I see it. So Steve and I talk about this all the time, and it's a great story. I mean, an amazing moment. So yes, that his big play almost did not happen. So what I like to say is I got the crowd warmed up for Steve to come in and do his thing. But it was actually Brian Scott who was our safety. All right. So I sacked Vic. Ball comes out. Brian comes up as a safety, has a chance to scoop and score on the sideline. Just bounces off his leg out of bounds. And I just remember the next day, our defensive coach is going back over and over and over again. It's like, Stack could have been him. So we joke about that all the time. But I tell Steve, I should get credit for the assist. I got the crowd kind of warmed up out of their seat, and Steve came in and just saw it through the tape.
What was the crowd like that game? Because, I mean, we've talked about it, and of course, we relive it. I remember the emotions around the game. I tell everybody, it's the most impactful game I've ever been involved with, and never in my life before have I cried before, after, during a football game that I was covering. But, national anthem, I mean, tears were streaming in that press box by not just me, but a lot of people. But what was the emotion like inside that place when that play happens and it literally explodes?
Yeah, I think it was that moment. It was the days leading up to that moment. You talk about the emotion of it. I think we all felt that. So I think, and that practice I referred to a couple of days before, I think that's when, for the first time, us as newcomers felt the weight of this, because we saw it in our teammates' faces who were there the year before, guys like Kevin Mangum who have been in New Orleans, forever. You see the look in their face and the pain, the anguish, and also the hope. that they carried with them in that moment. It's like, okay, I'm kind of getting this now. Then the days leading up to the game, and then the night you're showing up at the Superdome. And I get goosebumps before every game. I'm getting goosebumps right now just talking about it. So that feeling is always there when you're a player who's getting ready to strap up and step into the arena. But to see, tears running down, assistant coaches' faces and longtime trainers' faces and the fans' faces, I think that was the game for me where I kind of changed my semantics around how I referred to the fans. It was no longer like the fans or the people. It was like our fans, our people. And I found myself identifying with them in such a weird way. And this might sound like a reach, but drawing on like their pain and like the pain that, my family had experienced, and you guys know a bit about my dad's story and Japanese internment. It just felt like something that felt so connected to me in my story. And I think pain, and for those who have really lived it and experienced it, is universal, right? And I think it's just that moment you mentioned it, JD, like, the fact that guys like you were up there with these tears streaming down their face, looking in the front row of the fans as the game's kicking off, tears streaming down their faces. I'm like, man, this is just something really, really special and painful and hopeful. And obviously, we feel the pressure of having to deliver, but not feeling that there was any doubt about that. And it sounds weird to even talk about a game like that, but I think I would have had the same feeling if I was having this interview with you guys 30 minutes before kickoff. I think I would have had the same level of confidence. Hey, we don't want to disappoint, but we're not going to disappoint. It was just that level of confidence and swagger. And whether that was the emotion or Sean Payton and his swagger, and that exudes and sort of rubs off on the rest of the team, there was just no doubt that it was going to go the way it went. But yeah, that was when for me it became our community. It became our fans, not the fans, the community, like it would be in the 31 other places that I had been, or 31 other NFL cities. And I've been in some great football towns, right? I mean, Kansas City, Dallas, and Cleveland, great fans, right? But I think I would have just referred to them. Oh, the fans are great here. That's the night it became our people, and we were all in it together. That's what made it extra special.
It's a good way to put it, because that's where I wanted to go to next. When we look at some of the games that we're talking about in this list too, obviously the NFC Championship game, and I can see over your right shoulder there, the Super Bowl jersey. It all leads to 2009 too, but you mentioned some of the great cities and football fan bases the NFL has too. They've won championships. It's a championship. There's one or two where you kind of feel there's a storyline to it, right? When the Patriots beat the Rams here in the Dome after September 11th, something like that. But to me, that's why I think that Saints Super Bowl win, it's hard to explain outside of this area, right? Yes, it's a Super Bowl. It's a championship. You can't take that away from the historical football standpoint. But to your point, it started back in 06 on that night, didn't it? Where that was the ending of the story, one of the Cinderella story of everything. And it just meant so much more, because you talk about the weight of it. And we've talked to several players before, and I'm sure you can comment on it. The NFC Championship game, probably you guys had more pressure that night than when you got to Miami. It was almost like you could play loose and relax in that night. But that was it, right? From that night against the Falcons of MNF to the NFC Championship game, seeing Garrett kick that ball through, you're going there. All of that almost seems like one long season to me, if that makes sense.
It really does. It just sort of began this continuum of, an upward trajectory, obviously some, bumps along the way, but there definitely was an upward trajectory of the feeling of building something towards something. And there's a reason that, the statue says rebirth on it, right? That was the literal and figurative rebirth. I think not just for the team, but probably for the region and the community, right? I think you guys should speak to that better than I could, but that felt like a symbol of what was happening, and sort of like all boats rising together. And sort of culminating in that Super Bowl 4 years later. But you nailed it. I think the pressure, at the NFC Championship game, and I've said this over the years, that felt like a pressure cooker situation. We were a damn good team that year. I think Minnesota was probably more talented than they were. And in a lot of ways, I mean, they outplayed us, by many metrics, except the turnover battle. So we just became this opportunistic team that year who, again, found ways to win. Yes, we were talented, but they were next level talented. So on paper, man, we really had to claw and scratch, and some would say even get lucky, call it divine, whatever it is. But hey, opportunities presented themselves. We executed. That's why we won the game, right? But that felt like the pressure game. I remember talking about it on pregame warm-ups of the Super Bowl, and it felt like we had found the fountain of youth. Suddenly, all the aches and pains went away, and we were around like it was recess with our boys back on the yard as kids. And it was just, let's just go play ball. I mean, that was fun.
When you're in that situation, Scott, and you play, and as you mentioned, our fans, did you get that feel? We're playing for these folks who have, now they've come back, and not from '06, they've come back from that, but now we're on this journey with them where they're riding with us, and not necessarily that we owe them something, but you know what? It sure would be nice to get them something, get them a really nice gift.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, I think it was the night before the Super Bowl game. A few of us got up and sort of said some words to the team and shared our story and what it meant to us. And I think for some of those guys who came maybe a couple years after those of us who did in '06, I don't want to say that it was more transactional. They were joining an NFL team who at that point had had a little bit more success,
Yeah.
maybe pay a little bit better. Quarterback in Drew Brees, who is no longer a question mark with a shoulder, but a legit one of the best quarterbacks in the league. So then you're able to get guys like Jonathan Vilma and others who are willing to come in and join you on that quest. But sometimes I wondered, and I never asked them this question, whether they really understood sort of what you all and the team and our fans had been through, right? So that was kind of my message, and I wanted to walk everybody through the night before that Super Bowl game, really what it was like back in '06 in Millsaps and the steps that we had taken, and what it was like when only place to get takeout was Church's Chicken. I'm exaggerating to a certain extent, but that's what it felt like. So I remember just walking everybody through that and really what this meant to an entire region. And hey, it's no pressure, but see that as a way to amplify your play. So that was my key takeaway. I think it's easy to say, hey, don't worry about the fans, just focus on you, focus on your team, keep everything right here. Some people operate that way. I think I always operated better when I could find ways to make something personal. And that's what it was for me. So that was the message I was trying to communicate to the guys like JV and others who were awesome, such amazing additions. But I wanted them to recognize what, all those guys, I think back to, Lance Moore and BY and some of those guys who were there, in '05. And I remember hearing their stories and it's like, damn, you guys went through what?
Yeah.
And I felt like some of the newer players had to hear that story.
Now, was the Super Bowl then, I guess, almost faded? I mean, the '06 game against the Falcons was pretty much in the bag. Was the Super Bowl kind of like that? Because, after you get there, it's almost like, okay, the work is almost done. I mean, it's kind of, I don't want to say exhale because you're playing a really good team. They got a Hall of Fame quarterback. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, well, what else are we going to do besides win this thing? I mean, this is where we're supposed to be.
Yeah, I would say it felt that way. And again, it came down to Sean had, again, a great way to motivate, get the guys ready to play. Defensively, I felt like we had a great plan. I mean, Greg put together a really good plan for us, sort of each quarter mixing up and changing our coverages and almost having a whole new game plan for each quarter. So that was pretty masterful. And I think the way we executed, the way JV communicated, got everybody lined up. I was down closer to the line of scrimmage, getting the D line lined up and sort of running all our stunts. It was a pretty masterful plan. And obviously on the back end, I see TP in the back there. I mean, just the way they executed as well. All those things just aligned just right. And it's easy to say, yeah, we knew we were going to win, but it's also easy to say Peyton Manning was on the other side of the ball. And like no disrespect to Michael Vick, who's one of the best athletes I've ever seen in person. He's like in video game mode all the time. I don't think we ever really lost sleep about playing Michael Vick, right? I mean, you could put together a plan and feel like you can sort of contain him. He might run for 180, but if you shut down everything else, he's not going to beat you running for 180. So we didn't necessarily lose sleep over Michael Vick, even though he's just one of the best athletes, again, I've ever seen. Peyton, you lose sleep over. So the amount of study we had to do in preparation, he always felt like he was one or two steps ahead of you. In every game I ever played against him, I felt that way, except that day. I think we were that confident in our plan. And I was sort of given the list of checks and that he goes through in a given year. And we did a whole study about all the games, the whole season. We had all the TV audio of when he would say which checks and when. And they did kind of change from week to week, right? So Omaha might mean one thing one week and a different thing the next week. So all these things that Peyton is known for, we began to develop what we thought was a little bit of a rhyme and reason to it. So at least, this is sort of pre-data and analytics. So now there's probably an AI, program that goes in and sort of finds all that for you. We had to mine for this, and that took a lot of time during that week. So we came in on game day. If he said, laser, I'm just using that as an example, that probably meant, one of maybe two or three things, not one of 10 or 15 things, right? So that helps you then put yourself in a better position to play and defend, a couple of plays as opposed to 15 plays. So it's one of those games where you feel so prepared. And I sort of was the one who was, tasked with listening for it. And you hear a word, boom, JB, he said X. And then JB turnarounds, communicates Y. And then boom, things unravel and we win that down. So like things were so meticulously planned for through great coaching. I think coaches trusting the players then to execute the plan they put together, and all of us having to work together at it with JV as the glue, just communicating out to all. It was just one of those masterful plans. It's I haven't thought about this in a long time. So since we're here just sort of chatting about it, it's taking me back to that moment and what that felt like. I remember to be on the left side of the D line of scrimmage. I see Peyton look over at his right wide receiver. He communicates something. It's like, oh damn, he actually said it, and we know what they're gonna do. So you turn around and echo it, and we were right. I mean, it's like we out chessed Peyton Manning. That's what it felt like. So it was amazing.
It was interesting you say that because we had Tracy Porter in the day that he was announced to going into the Saints Hall of Fame coming up here. So we, brought him in, had him sit down and go over, and I played the highlights of the interception, obviously in the NFC Championship game, and then the Super Bowl one. And it was just like you. The recollection was still there. He's looking up like he's there in the stadium, and he went through that whole call there as well. And he was like, look, we knew what was coming. We knew what we was going to do. And he went through that play to it. I don't know, give us your emotions, man, of what that was like. Because they're two completely different interceptions, right? At that time in the game and when it went. But they're the two biggest interceptions I can think of, really, when you think about it like that.
Yeah, obviously happy for Tracy. And that moment was amazing. And I just love, it's like, in terms of like how history tells a story of that game, I even just looking at the pennant behind you guys, like it's such an iconic play, but iconic imagery and iconic video, and the way sort of the seas parted, he sort of darts through. And then Shannon and I talk about this all the time. Like he and I are running behind TP trying to catch up. We love the fact that we blew right by Will Smith. That was great. We got rid of Will, bless his heart, our boy Will. But I mean, so much video and footage of Tracy, and like I can show my kids, like, look at that's me and Shanley behind him. It was just such an iconic moment, obviously, and Tracy, we talk about execution, knowing what's coming, and then it's one thing to know what's coming, another thing to actually execute. And he did, and that's just that's a sort of a factor of good film study, good prep, and moment presents itself. You're in or you're out. Tracy was in. End of story.
Scott, how smart was this defense overall? Because you're talking about changing game plans basically quarter by quarter in the Super Bowl against Peyton Manning. There aren't a lot of teams capable of doing that kind of thing.
I think we had a very mature defense, a defense that Greg and Joe and Sean trusted to execute. I don't think they could have done that with every team. I think there's certain special teams who have the right mix of talent and sort of intellect who have the ability to piece it all together and then also communicate it to those around you. So there was a significant level of trust there for the players to execute. But it was a really good plan. It was the first time I'd ever been part of a plan like that, where each week or each quarter there was sort of a total coverage change. And that was just try to combat Peyton, right? You never want to let him get too comfortable. Everything was about disrupting him at his feet, gut pressure. He was a really tough sack, but disrupt him at his feet with the gut pressure. And then the coverage kept changing quarter by quarter on the back end. It was pretty masterful.
So the Superdome turns 50. What do you look at now, I guess, in the future, or as you said, you can tell your kids where, there have been some humongous games and events played in that venue, and you were a part of several of them with the Saints for a building that now, as we mentioned, turns 50. And we've seen, iconic, I say iconic, quote unquote, buildings go by the wayside. But the Superdome still stands, and you can say, hey, I was in that building, and two of the biggest games in the history of that franchise, probably the two biggest games in the history of that franchise in that building, I was a part of.
Yeah, I think sometimes I get accused of being overly emotional about this stuff, but it really does just still stand as a beacon of hope. I was in New Orleans, about 3 or 4 weeks ago with my daughter, my twin girls now who were born in '07. They're getting ready to go to college the year after next. So we were in town catching up with friends. Went to visit Tulane. She's sort of like a 1A and 1B, and Tulane is either 1A or 1B. So I might have a kid in New Orleans soon, which would be awesome.
Cool.
Anyway, as she and I are getting landing at the airport and driving into town, we're going to go stay uptown so she can get a sense for the community there. And as we're driving by the Superdome, yeah, she's been to enough games there to recognize that's a building that football is played in, right? She got to attend a couple games as a 1, 2, maybe 3 year old. As Drew and the guys were still playing, we'd take the kids back every once in a while to go see, the people she was still close with and their kids. But I think she sees it the same way. So it's like history is going to tell the story. And I think the story it is a beacon of hope. And I just love that my kids see that too. She was 2 years old, I think, last time I played a game in there. But she recognizes what it means to me. The same pictures you've got right there, we've got around my office. So that is ingrained kind of in their story. So I just love that they have that level of appreciation for it and what the building stands for too, right? Coming up on 50 years now. You named it, JD. Buildings come and go and they fall by the wayside and they get rebuilt. I think as a testament to the story of a city and a region, I think there's nothing that tells a story better than the Superdome. And to even have been, a small part of it for my 4 years there, it just feels special because, again, I say it all the time, it felt like a chance to be a part of something so much bigger than just football. And really the best 4 years of my life, we talk about all the time. Scott, where'd you enjoy playing the most? Or what were the best 4 years of your life? My wife and I talk about that all the time. Place that gave me a chance to come in and contribute and be a part of a literal and figurative rebuild, right? Of a team, a building, a region. That felt great. Place where my kids were born. That's special. Some of the best friends I made in my life, I'm still in touch with on a text thread, that Super Bowl crew. There's 8 or 9 of us. And it might be 50 or 60 messages per day. Politics, making fun of each other, memes, whose college team is worse than the other one, how the Saints are doing. Damn, the Saints sucks this year. The Saints are great this year. It's all there. I talk about the feeling on the night of those games or in that moment. Even though the details might get foggy, the feeling is still there. So I'm just so grateful that Benson's, Mickey, Sean, the whole crew gave my family a chance to come in and be a part of it.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to put it. I can't think of a better bookend too when you think of the Dome, a place that will cause, the feels and the tears. And at the same time, the opposing team needs to wear purple earplugs because they can't hear in there. That's what the Dome was, man. A real true home Dome advantage or home field advantage. Thanks for the time, man. Going back in time and kind of look at it. And as JD said, anytime I needed something as the sideline reporter, I always went to you because you'd talk to me, and B, you'd be honest about it, man. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. No, I love you guys. Appreciate you. It's been a long time. I love whenever I get back to connect with everybody. And it's just, you guys were always so good to me, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Scott, because you were always great to us, man. The Cal hat wears well. I'm sure Cam will probably want one if he doesn't have one, because I'm sure Cal takes care of him. But hey, he's going to want one anyway.
Cam is still repping Cal quite well, that's for sure.
Love that, man. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate the time, bud.
All right, guys, take care.
All right, time now to welcome in the voice of your New Orleans Saints, Mr. Mike Hoss. John, when I think of, obviously, what Mike does now is trying to put or paint the picture of what he sees out on the football field and during a game. But I was thinking as we look back and look at the Dome reopening game, who better to kind of give us that perspective, Mike, as well, from a perspective of somebody that covered what took place for there to be a stoppage of play in the Superdome, in a hole in the dome, and all of that. And I was thinking, hey, who better to have than Mike Hoss, who was anchoring at the time for WWL TV, covering the storm, the aftermath, everything that led into it, and even into that game.
Yeah, Mike's, I don't want to say similar, but I think I kind of understand where Mike's coming from. He's, as a person who works at the TV station or the newspaper, as I did back then, you're trying to be an independent arbiter. Right? You're not supposed to choose sides, even though you want the home team to win, because it's always good for the fan base. It's good for the city.
Makes your job a lot easier.
It's good for business. It's good for business. But in a situation like that, there are no independent arbiters. You go with the flow because it's a huge emotional event, and in sports you don't really get a whole lot of those. You get events that are pretty huge. It might be a Super Bowl, it might be an NBA Finals, it might be the Masters or whatever. But when you mix in the emotion, because this was a regular season game, it's not like this was a playoff game. This was a regular season game. But the emotions that go into it and the buildup that goes into it, and you're talking about, again, a city that theoretically was underwater and people had kind of given up on New Orleans. And so I think it was an emotional thing for everybody because, when people give up on you and tell you you can't recover or you won't recover or you shouldn't be given the means to help recover, it pisses you off. And so, so you got a lot of things, a lot of emotions rolled into a football game. And so, I understand, as I said, I worked at the paper and you go in and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to just write my column and I'm going to get out of here. And you get in there and it's like, okay, this is way more than that. Way more than that. So, I can't speak for Mike. I'll let Mike speak for himself.
Well, I hope you guys don't have a lot of questions because when I get started down this one, I get going. But some background. So I was the 10 o'clock anchor at the time at Channel 4. And in that 06, I was like almost as a community-minded thing. I told my brother, let's get season tickets. And so he said, sure. So we bought 4 season tickets. It wasn't like, that was going to make the difference in the world. And quite frankly, Derek Henderson, Jim's son, was in sales here. Yep. And he's the one that sold me our tickets. And he was like, literally, well, where do you want to sit, dude? Like, I think I could have run a play if I really bartered in my because can you imagine? Because I know, I've been in this building, people making cold calls to people in New Orleans who are trying to rebuild their homes. Yeah. And you're trying to sell them Saints tickets. Yeah. So I became a Saints season ticket holder. I got here in 1989. I have never sat in a seat in the Superdome and watched a game until that night, September 25th, 2006. That is my first Saints game, period, not in a press box, not in a suit, ever, right? So the fact the game is on ESPN and Monday Night Football, I said, there ain't going to be nobody watching our 10 o'clock news. Can I have off? And they said, sure, ain't nobody watching. Go knock yourself out. So I'm truly a fan. First time, I think what people kind of forget a little bit is that this ain't the first game. No. Right? And remember, there were no home preseason games. Nope. But I think we forget Cleveland, right? They played not great. Yeah. And I'm going, wait. The Saints went on the road, didn't have their A game.
Come back.
And win.
Packers.
Right?
Yeah.
Then they go to the Packers. 2 turnovers in the first quarter. It's 13-0. I'm going, oh, my gosh. And they come back and beat Brett Favre, and they're 2-0. And I mean, it's like, but it just kind of gets, I think if you ask people, 6 out of 10 would say the Falcons game is the first game of the year, right? So, and I think the amazing thing about it is like how things have, I kind of look at the fateful aspect of it, right? Because if it happened in this day, Falcons won the toss. What the Falcons have done in our football today, they defer. Yeah. Back then, you didn't do that. Sean didn't do it. Falcons didn't do it. Falcons took the ball, right? And 3rd and 4 after a work done run, an incomplete pass, and Vic rolls out. Ball comes out. Now, it could bounce any other way. It kind of slow. Scott Fujita was around it. It kind of, the Saints had a moderate chance of getting it. And that changes history. Right? If he recovers the fumble, Saints got the football. And I'm going, but wait, right? And that was the next cool part is that it's kind of, all right, it wasn't crazy. It wasn't loud. It was a punt, right? But where our seats were, you could see the crater open up for Gleason, but you weren't thinking it until you got boom. Jim Moore used to say it was either the greatest thing he ever heard or the worst thing he heard. It's that foot block. Ba-boom, ba-boom. And at that point, I black out for a little bit until you kind of see poor Curtis DeLoach, right? I mean, we talk about this block punt. Does anybody ever talk about Curtis? I don't even know where the man is. I don't know what's going on with Curtis DeLoach. But, I mean, he recovered the ball in the end zone literally right in front of us. And I get emotional too, just because it was. People have asked me hundreds of times about that play, and I go, you can't kind of understand unless you'd lived it like we had. Channel 4 was here for the storm, during the storm, after the storm, whole thing. I was one of the first ones, if not the first person, I know it was at Channel 4, to see the Superdome on the morning of August 29th after the storm. It was my birthday, with that thing, flapping in the wind, thinking it's done, right? And then I was also, I get ahead of us. Let's go back to the punt. So it's a cheer, it's exhilaration, but it's also a release. And when I tell people what it was like, they don't get it. I go, it was guttural, right? You felt it. It was not, hey, touchdown. It was a guttural release. And it went on and on and on, and jumping up and down and hugging everybody. And then I kind of juxtapose that a bit, because I've kind of, since you've seen it, you watch the block and you see Drew on the side and you see Sean's reaction, and I'm like, that's a blur to me, right? Yeah. But to be there are times in my life when things aren't going well, and you go back to that moment. Because it wasn't expected. It was just a block punt. It was the first quarter, for gosh sake. It was 7-0. Falcons scored on the next drive, making 7-3. Morton Anderson kicked the field goal. And I'm like, Morton Anderson, right? And so many things had to happen. But because I had seen that dome on August 29th of 2005, and we were out there, there's no Champion Square. There's none of that stuff, right? You're standing there when they, let that banner go down, and you watch that clock, and it was packed, and it was not easy to get into your seats. They had trash bags, literally like vinyl trash bags, covering things. Bars were like makeshift bars. Nobody cared. Nobody said a thing. And the other thing is, I had to go back and look at the game book today, because I'm like, what happened the rest of the game? Like, I knew it was 23-3.
There was no rest of the game.
I couldn't tell you. I remember kind of Devery Henderson, but literally it was 14 points in the first quarter. We had Saints had one touchdown, 3 field goals. Morton kicked the first quarter. It was probably like the most boring game beyond. If you're watching it at home, by halftime, you probably turned it off. It wasn't exciting, right? But it was, and it was no shock that you could not keep that momentum going the next week in Carolina, right? I mean, how you going to? But that moment, and because I had worked in the news side of it for Channel 4, and that, and people go, oh, you're back, 06, you're back. Well, no, you had to live here. You would get off of an exit to go to a gas station. Gas station wasn't open. Gas station wasn't there, right? From here to Biloxi, you just didn't know, right? We were no more back, but as we say, it was very important, and I know it was controversial, and I understand why it was controversial to rebuild that Superdome, but Doug Thornton says it best: if we can do that, you can come back. You can come back and rebuild we rebuilt this thing in 8 months, from the roof to the floor. You can come back. And I think that was the symbol. That was the message. That was look at this. The word iconic is overused, not when you talk about the Superdome, and not when you talk about that night, September 25th of 2006. Again, it was my first game. And I was like, and this is the 06 season. They go to the NFC Championship game. And I'm like, what are y'all talking about, all this losing stuff? Like, I've been a season ticket over 1 year. We go to the NFC Championship, 10-6. We thought Reggie Bush, we're the greatest team ever. And it was that season. I tell people all the time, if you lived here and you went through it, 06 to me was more important than 09.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
09 was great. We enjoyed it, but 06 was, and they were 10-6. And they lost some games down the stretch. It didn't matter a whole lot. And even when we were 13-0 in 09, it was, you'd seen it enough to expect it. But it was, that season carried people almost. It carried you through. You didn't miss games, right? You did not miss a play. And so when I bought our season tickets, I think they had a lot, right? But through that season, you couldn't get them. and then it became a waiting list, right? And that one, you talk about just a turnaround. It was. Man, it was amazing. I was kind of a hybrid. I was a news anchor, but because of my sports background, they said just keep covering them. So I was in Chicago for the NFC Championship game, a game that, quite frankly, they should have won. I couldn't make. Sean Payton had a dinner before he left, and he said, "Media can come, and you can ask me anything you want." And I was going to ask him. I said, "Third quarter, you're down, but you are running it down their throats. You had." I can't remember the fullback's name. Big guy, Mike
Carney.
Mike Carney is running off, runs
Mike Carney.
15, 18 yards. You were just jamming it down their throats. And I'm going, this is it, man. You've got them on their heels. And he, threw it like 3 straight times, incomplete. Just pissed me off. And I was like, I don't think it changed the game. But I'm always curious about that. But, man, it's I think remembered more whenever February, 2010 comes around, February 7th, I think we almost have to be reminded, oh yeah, I saw that on Twitter or X, it was February, but not the 25th.
Right.
Not the 25th.
Yeah,
Told you. There's it. One question.
That's why you're here.
There you go.
See, that night, excuse me, that night kind of, for me, it's like, you've seen those memes where the Undertaker sits up? That was like New Orleans sitting up saying, "Hey, we ain't dead. We ain't going nowhere. We can come back. We'll be okay." And that night, it could have been the Steel Curtain. It could have been the Niners, heyday 80s. It could have been, the Cowboys triplets. It could have been any team in NFL history. The Packers, the Six. I don't care who it was. They were not going to beat the Saints that night. It wasn't going to happen because the football gods said, "Look, we might not give you anything else, but you get this one. You get this one. It's all set up in your favor." And I mean, pregame, like, I had to compose myself for the game because I'm in the press box. Again, you're supposed to be an independent arbiter. But, I mean, I'm up there crying, and everybody else is up there crying. And, I mean, real, trying to hold back. I mean, you're just crying because you cannot help it. Because if you didn't get emotionally attached to that, then something's wrong with you.
Right.
There had to be something wrong with you if you could stay independent on it. I don't think there was anybody in the press box or on the field who didn't say, "You know what, I want New Orleans to win this game."
Yeah.
And J.L. Moore, who's on the opposite sideline after the game, said, basically, I don't have no problem with them winning the game. Right. It's okay. They deserved it. They needed it. And so it was one of those things where, as Mike said, when you look at it from the totality of restoring the Superdome, it was a message to everybody that, hey, it's not going to be easy, but you can come home. It's not going to be simple. It won't be a quick fix, but we can all work together. And we can put this back together. We can reestablish this if you're willing to work at it. And a lot of people were, And of course, some people said, "You know what? No, that's okay." And I get that. I understand that. But for the people who came back and the people who stayed, that kind of fortitude. Again, you always talk about fan bases and grit and blah 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 blah. Well, this was that. This was a fan base and a populace saying, we are not going anywhere. We're not going to go away. We're going to rebuild. We're going to rebuild better. $6 million man. We're going to bring him back, stronger, better. and everybody said, okay, we can do this. It won't be easy. It won't, but we can have some fun doing it too because we can watch this football team because, look, I'm with Mike. You didn't know what kind of crowd was going to show up. Yeah. You didn't know if there was going to be a crowd to show up. And when that crowd came in there and those folks were like, you know what, everything that's going on outside the Superdome right now, we don't care. We just want to have this entertainment. We want to have this. We want to wrap our arms around this. We want to hug it real tight, and we don't ever want to let it go. And the Saints played that way. The team played that way.
Well, think about it. It was the first game in the Superdome since the preseason game on Friday, the 26th.
Baltimore Ravens.
Baltimore Ravens.
I remember that because
that's the first from that game that in today's world would never be played. I mean, I don't blame him. I mean, it was nothing changed until 4:00 that afternoon. But that was the last game of the Dome.
We did that game, and I was at WBL Radio for 9 years, and that's how I met you with doing TV and radio. And I think it's so funny, almost full circle coming back to it, but. I was doing morning drive sports at the time, and I'm doing my first sportscast at 7:15 on Saturday. But we had done that game on Friday. We went to the Bulldog, a couple of friends of ours after the game. And what stood out to me was what's normally on the TVs at bars. Whatever sports games are on, right? Yeah. Preseason games, the Weather Channel's on.
Yeah.
And I remember, and obviously being in the news field, like we have meetings, right? The emergency preparedness folks during hurricane season, a week or so before. We've all sat in the rooms where there's the worst case scenario, graphic this year, and this is what we're going to do. We all plan. Everybody's car, you have your bag of stuff for storms and all that. And I remember hitting the first sound bite of that game. And in the middle of the soundbite, Dave Cohen, the news director, walks in and says, they're going to call for contraflow. You're leaving. This is your last sportscast. We're going full. And I remember I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. I was like, oh, no. And during, I end my sportscast, toss it to the anchor, pick up the phone, call my wife and say, pack.
Yep.
Because we're leaving. And I remember after that going, to get gas. And I'm at a donut shop, getting stuff to drive on the road because I don't want to be on the road for 10 hours, like the previous storm. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, I wonder if people, just knowing what was coming. And that's kind of why I wanted to have you here too, is like, what took place and the coverage and then seeing it. And then to come kind of full circle to where you are now, being in there. Because you worked with the Dome for a while too.
Yeah, working now. I'm the media relations manager for the Dome, and I work both full-time for WWL radio. But so it was like any other. Channel 4, Sandy Breland, our news director, brilliantly had devised a plan years before. I don't know if it was Ivan or might have been George or some storm that we said we need a plan. We're going to keep half our team here in New Orleans, half our team's going to Baton Rouge, and we'll be able to maintain coverage. We're initially at LSU, and then we moved to LPB. But that was the most, because everybody else left, right? Mm-hmm. But I mean, we just thought it was another, Friday at 4:00. So 29th is Monday, 28th, 27th, 26th. Friday the 26th, ironically. So the 4:00 reading comes out, right? And so weather anchors get it about 2 minutes really before 4:00 so they can look at it before they're getting ready to go on air. And I called her out and said, oh my God, it's going west. And it's going to the 90th, parallel, whatever. I'm not good with those. Anyway, 90 degrees is bad for us.
Yeah.
90 degrees is straight up the river.
Right.
And the storm is, counterclockwise going to push all that water. And he goes, it's at 90, it's moved west, it's at 90, and there's nothing that's going to move it. And that's Friday. And I'm like, come on, man. He says, there's nothing that's going to move it. And I called my wife at 1 minute to 4. I said, book rooms! Because in 3 minutes, you couldn't get a room anywhere in Louisiana. Now, we'd had the next day on our schedule to get a second mortgage on our house, a HELOC on our home equity line of credit on our house. And we went. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, we went. I go, is there more of a surreal thing to sit in a bank and sign paperwork? This is Saturday now.
Yeah.
Saturday morning. In the car is my bag of 3 days of stuff, peanuts, M&Ms, picture of my family, right? 3 days of stuff like everybody else. And I'm signing paperwork for a house. I don't know if it's going to be there in a few days. Like it is, you treated it kind of like every other storm. And really Monday the 29th, when we went out, we went back to the station. We had power. It felt like every other storm. Really, I'm like, we survived. Like that's the biggest thing. And if you were in news at the time, is that you can't explain it to people as the vacuum of news. We knew nothing. We knew nothing. We knew the levees had broke, but that didn't mean anything. It did. It did. Okay, Mr. Go, got it. We didn't really understand the outflow canal levees breaking. Monday was a typical day. Tuesday, I slept on the floor Monday night and woke up Tuesday. There's water in the city. We're like, water in the city? What are you talking about? Like, it didn't, like, there was no police, no phones, no nothing. You went and, it was, to me, I know, I'll shut up here. It was the greatest event of journalism ever, because you just went out and found the news. There was no pressers, there was no info. You went out and journalistically found, in the middle of I-10 at Causeway, 50 helicopters bringing people and landing, and buses taking them to Baton Rouge. Just happened to drive upon it. I was like, what in the world? You had no idea. But it was, and so it was see news, report news. See news, report news.
Right. And then to see that building become...
Yeah. And and the Superdome was like any other building. Guess what? FEMA paid for a lot of that, right? So you had Formica countertops. Guess what? You're putting back Formica. We lived the same rules as everybody else. You could rebuild it to the way it was.
To exactly how it was.
To the way it was. So we were like every other family. And, but it was important, and it wasn't easy. Governor Blanco had a huge role. NFL had a huge role. Tom Benson and the Saints had a huge role. I credit all of them for making it happen, because, when you start cutting into that roof, fortunately, it was that year, one of the driest years, from when we had the storm, to we almost had no rain. Mm-hmm. Right? Unbelievable. Now, after the storm, you expect that because of the high pressure. But the rest of 2005 and the beginning of 2006 was almost no rain. That's without it, I don't know how we do it, right? But it was an amazing, the building is amazing. I just, now I've been the spokesperson for the renovation since 19. And I thought I'm like John. I spent our professional lives in that building. I knew everything about it. I didn't know jack about that building. Jack. I knew where my seat was. I knew how to get to the press box, which, by the way, used to be at 300. Yes, and I knew how to get to the locker room. That's it. I was like, and now my office is in the building, and it's like, wow, this is cool.
Yeah, don't remind me of the 300 level seats. That's the salad days. Yeah. But yeah, it's again, it's a building that has stood the test of time. We talk about it all the time. All the NFL facilities that have gone the way of the dinosaur since the Superdome was constructed. And it's amazing that it's still there and it's still as functional as ever. And, they keep finding ways to improve it. And the footprint isn't getting any bigger on the outside, but they find ways to reconfigure on the inside.
That's because of the footprint on the inside.
The footprint on the inside was so impressive.
When they built that building, 2 million square feet, which doesn't mean a lot to anybody, but just know that the Houston Astrodome's 1 million square feet.
Yeah.
It fits inside, and that was the only other building that they had as a indication, guys with pencils and protractors and girls with pencils and protractors built the most amazing building. And I would go back and read. My office is like an archival, just jumbo mess. Articles of how shouldn't do it. It was overrun, over budget, and all these things. And this thing's going to be a colossal disaster. And so wrong. It's an economic driver for Shreveport, Monroe, Ruston. Money doesn't flow directly, but it flows to Baton Rouge, and it's a state building. I always have to remind people, the Saints don't own that building. Saints lease it from the state. The LSED runs it. The city has no ownership. The Saints don't own it. That is a state building. Money that goes from taxes from there go to Baton Rouge, and it gets eventually statewide. We always want to say that because we want it to be a state building. We want it to be a regional, hub like it is.
Yeah, it's amazing. See, now the thing is the vision. Always, Dave Dixon and his crew. Who thought, or who would have thought back then? Hey, you know what? Let's make it 2 million. And you know what? In the future, maybe there'll be some use for this space. We don't need it right now, but
baseball.
It's good to have it.
Baseball.
Yeah, baseball too.
Multifunction and baseball is one of the reasons that building is so big. It's one of the reasons we have, as you know, in the building, We all have roofs over our head in those sections because you hang out. Our 500 section, to me, if you gave me one seat to sit in the building, I'd pick 500. You're way out. You have a roof over your head because it's down the right field line, right? And we had movable seats. And so you'd move seats for basketball and move them back and forth. Just geniuses.
Yeah.
But because of baseball in a multifunction stadium, you needed size. So you got 2 million square feet and on different mezzanines so you could have multiple events at the same time. Dave Dixon, Buster Curtis, the initial architects and dreamers and visionaries were followed by the Trahans and the Broadmoors who just completed our renovation. And you got to have visionaries and dreamers and stakeholders. But the beauty is, now I'm probably the oldest in the room. I feel like I'm the oldest in the room. But this building now has generational moments coming for my kids who are 24 and 26, right? And so that is the best part, right? The other ones, you're right, Metrodome, Detroit, Seattle, they're all gone. And the Astrodome would be gone. They just can't tear it down, right? Yeah. It's too much. They don't even, it's got so much bad stuff inside. They can't tear it down. They want to. But a new generation of memories for that building, for what it costs, unbelievable.
Yeah, I think that was the thing as we close up. The thing that stands out to me, is you use the word iconic. And obviously, being somebody that's born and raised here and grew up with it, I turned 50 in January. I don't know a skyline.
You're the youngest in the room,
right?
I clearly tell you that.
And my 8-year-old is the same thing.
John and I've been around.
He doesn't know anything but that building
59.
on there, And I think that's the thing that stands out to me. It's so much more than just a sporting venue. And when you look at all the different things, and you guys talked about Visionary and all the different events you had, from popes to presidential conventions, to all kinds of different games. I remember the college showdowns, which were great, when it was state versus state. Now we see how big college baseball is. Seeing the A's, I think, with the Bash Brothers there. Just so many things, concerts, everything. I think you can make a safe case, an argument. It might be one of the most important buildings in the city. You got the cathedral, right?
No.
I mean, because that. But and then it's the dome. I mean, it just, to me, honestly, I think it is.
If you put that cathedral up, some people, not everybody would know what that is because it's a cathedral. It could be in any city. I will say this because I know we're closing up. Because of my new job with Deuce and traveling to other cities and other stadiums, and they're new, and they don't have what we will have forever, and that's soul. Right? We've cheered in that building. We've hugged in that building. We've cried in that building. We have shared moments in that building that puts a bond together that I can assure you SoFi ain't ever going to have. Those new buildings are nice, but they're going to outlive themselves in 20 years because they're built for what's popular now. And it'll be popular in 25 years. I mean, most buildings go 30 years. Our 30th anniversary, that's typically how long stadiums last. 30 years. That's what you bond them out. 30 years. 2005, Katrina. That's our 30th anniversary. And so it enabled us to kind of go restart the clock. And then this renovation restarts it again. But there's a character, class, and soul is what the Superdome has that other buildings want to have. And I've been to Lambeau. Lambeau's great. They ain't crying in that building together, right? They've never had I don't know if they've had no building's had a Gleason moment, right? I mean, even Hartley's kick is not a Gleason moment, right? We remember it, but I mean, it's not a Gleason moment. And Deloach, Gleason and Deloach, it's like a law firm. So those three things, that's what separates the Superdome: class, soul, and character.
Mr. Mike Hoss, thank you so much for your time, sir. Voice of your New Orleans Saints.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Scott Fujita and Mike Hoss for going back in time and giving us their perspectives, not only on the field, but also, as Mike said, in the stands to what that magical night was like. All right, John, as we put a wrap on that, and again, always great to go back and listen to people and what that experience was like that night. It is easily the moment. I mean, because when you think of year 1 to now year 50 of the Caesar Superdome, that probably is the moment. that you just think about for me.
I'll never forget it. I've been to a lot of sporting events, a lot of venues, a lot of big games, college national championships in basketball and football and NBA finals and Super Bowls and, this, that, and the third. And no event ever will top that one for me. Every time I'm asked, what's the most memorable sporting event you've covered, that one's always it. That one's always it.
So we've taken a look at 10 of the greatest games inside the Caesars Superdome, and we thank you for listening to Home Sweet Home, New Orleans Saints podcast presented by Caesars New Orleans. We will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Home Sweet Home, a New Orleans Saints podcast presented by Caesars New Orleans.
Favre sprints to his right, throws back across the middle, and he's intercepted. Porter.
For the latest on the black and gold, check out NewOrleansSaints.com. And be sure to check out the New Orleans Saints podcast for the latest news from your favorite team.
Will he get it here? Yes! Touchdown pass, 5-4-0 in the 504.
We'll catch you next time on Home Sweet Home.